Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Activate Your Vision, 3 Key Practices to Achieve What Matters Most. Brought to you by your Vanderbilt Alumni Association. I'm Sarah Whitney Anderson, Assistant Director of Alumni and Student Engagement, and I'm so glad you could join us from wherever you are this afternoon. Today's webinar will last around 45 minutes with time at the end for questions. Please feel free to type those questions as you have them in the questions box on the side panel of your screen. Throughout the presentation, we will make sure these are addressed in some way before time is up. We will record today's webinar and post on the Expert Advice webpage in VU Connect, and we will share the recording with you via email. Many of you know our presenter today from previous alumni career offerings here at Vanderbilt, and I'm so excited she's back with us for this presentation. Deb Palmer George is dedicated to helping people connect with the best in themselves and others to achieve what matters most. As a facilitator, coach, and speaker, Deb guides people toward the fullest expression of their potential, personally and professionally, individually, and collectively. She does this by integrating timeless truths with today's research in human flourishing and organization development. Having started her own business career selling copiers on straight commission, Deb progressed to VP of HR and Business Development, becoming the company's first woman vice president. Since 2001, when a life is too short moment inspired her to launch her own consulting business, Deb has combined her real-world experience leading HR, OD, strategic planning, and business development with education and advanced training in appreciative inquiry, conversational intelligence, conflict transformation, and positive organization development. Over the years, Deb has worked with executives, teams, and full organizations ranging from technology startups to healthcare institutions, project teams to board of directors. Leaders in all sectors engage Deb for an empowering, practical approach to moving beyond challenges and adversity to build positive relationships and optimum results. I'm so excited to invite Deb, and we'll let her begin now.
Sarah, thank you so much. I'm really glad to be here. Hello, everyone. I'm excited for our time together over the next 45 minutes. Sarah, as you were sharing a bit about my career path, I was really thinking about how much I hope that in this session there will be something of value to everyone on their career paths. So let's jump in, and just to reiterate what Sarah said, I really look forward to any questions that we can answer during or at the close of the session. Activate your vision. The 3 key practices that we'll be covering to achieve what matters most really took shape for me as in my own career path, and then as I started coaching others, and I discovered how easy it seemed to be to create aspirational images of our desired future. Probably many of us here have vision statements, maybe vision boards or vision portfolios. So there are these wonderful activities that many of us engage with to create these aspirational images of the desired future. And yet something that I discovered were how many people, or how often it was, that those aspirational images didn't come to pass, that somehow what someone really believed in and also had the abilities and the resources or access to resources to achieve somehow didn't come to pass. And it really got clear to me maybe what one of the causes of that was when I was watching the movie Apollo 13 one day. So we're going to touch on Apollo 13 a couple of times during this session, because I think it's just an incredibly inspiring and, of course, true story about what it actually means to activate your vision, to live into something really big on the other side of something that is possibly incredibly challenging. So if you're familiar with Apollo 13, you know that there was an explosion in the space capsule 200,000 miles out in space with no hope of rescue or no hope of assistance. And what the mission became about was finding a way to keep the astronauts alive in space long enough to figure out how to bring them home safely. And it's really an inspiring story that we reflect on in a number of ways in terms of human ingenuity and teamwork, and also what it means to truly activate your vision in the present. So at one point in the mission, when they were actively working in mission control to figure out how to save Apollo 13, one of the NASA officials said in front of a large group of people in mission control, he said, this could turn out to be the worst disaster in NASA history. And in that moment, the mission commander, Gene Kranz, interrupted him and said, I beg your pardon, sir, but I believe this will turn out to be our finest hour. And what stood out to me in that moment about that is, okay, worst disaster, finest hour. Those are both fantasies of the future. They're both fantasies of what could come to pass. They're a form of the vision. Now, if you asked the guy who said, do you actually want this to turn out to be our worst disaster? He would say, no, of course not. I want us to triumph. I want this to be a great success. And yet what happens for many of us is that we carry active images or default images of what will happen in the future that are misaligned with what we truly hope for. So we may put on our vision board images of the finest hour, but we may walk around, move through every day, envisioning worst disaster. What this made clear to me is that we carry active images of our future in the present, and it's essential that there be an alignment in the moment between those active images and what we hope for. I think this is captured really well in this quote by Viktor Frankl, who was a Viennese psychiatrist interred in a concentration camp. And Frankl decided that he wanted to get something out of the experience. And so he studied the behavior of his fellow prisoners. And what he discovered was that prisoners who carried some sense of hope, who carried some idea of being connected to something larger and more important than themselves, they survived longer. In fact, their behavior actually had some sort of influence on the way that they were treated by the guards. So of course, what Frankl lived to write about was his discovery that between stimulus, the things that happen to us every day, and response, how we react, where we might think those things are intertwined, there's actually a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and our freedom. The power to me here in activating our vision is that once we set the vision, then we go about our day-to-day life, our day-to-day work. And as we are moving through that day-to-day, we encounter various challenges, conditions in the environment that may be unexpected. And oftentimes, what can happen is that when a surprise comes up for us, we end up reacting to it by abandoning our vision, by saying, oh, well, it's not going to work out, or now I'm never going to be able to do this. And so what happens is the vision ends up taking a back seat to, as Stephen Covey used to call, the tyranny of the urgent, things that are right in front of us. That are things that perhaps we didn't want to happen, but yet those things become focal for us. But what we know about human beings, about human organizations, and about us as individuals is that we move in the direction of what we focus on and what we talk about. And so when things emerge that are unexpected for us, we can often begin to focus on those things immediate, right in front of us, and forget about the long range direction that we actually want to move. It's essential that we continue focusing on where it is we want to go, not on where we don't. So a key to activating our vision really is choosing inspirational language for that vision. Language that focuses us on where we want to go, not on where we don't. Focuses us on what we want to happen instead of what we don't want to happen. Now, the reason I chose the images that you've seen on the screen here, my husband is retired from Bridgestone Americas, and he came back from a company retreat one time where they had been given the opportunity to drive race cars around a test track. And one of the things that he shared with me is they taught him that when they're training race car drivers, of course, no one wants to crash, but yet the tendency is for new drivers to look where they don't want to go. So they look at the wall, and guess where they end up going. So the key to activating our vision is getting very clear on where we want to go. An image of the future that is both inspiring to us and also instructive. The vision needs to be specific enough that it acts like an instruction manual for the actions to take in the present to create that future. So if you've ever had the pleasure of assembling a new bike or a new barbecue grill or something from IKEA, something that you'll see in the first couple of pages of that manual is a vision of where the assembly is going to take you. So it's a vision of what the finished product looks like. And what you see is the vivid detail or the vivid components of that vision. And what that does is that helps you to know what are the actions that I need to take in the present to create that future that I want to end up in, or that future that I want to land in. So activating the vision really includes these three key practices, at least that I've found in my life, in my work with my clients, and in my research and studies. I don't ever presume to say I have the way. This is a way. I hope everyone finds it valuable. So the first is appreciating what's best. What that means is that activating your vision, and it might sound counterintuitive, it doesn't begin with where we want to go. What it begins with is what we actually already have, what's already best about us. That takes us into imagining the ideal, an ideal that is both inspiring and instructive, something that we care enough to keep active in the day-to-day, something that is worthy of investing the resources of our time, our energy, our relationships, all of our resources. And then the third practice is acting in alignment with that vision, or ensuring that the choices that we're making every day are moving us in the direction of what we want most. So let's take a little bit deeper dive into the first practice, appreciate what's best. So appreciation is really, it's an attitude, it's a way of thinking that focuses on recognizing what is, and then also seeking to increase in value what's best or what matters most. So appreciating what's best is a form of attitude that includes both that internal way of thinking, but also a direction, a practice that moves us in a certain way. And this also comes particularly out of space travel, that attitude also is a way that they measure or talk about the direction of a spacecraft. So probably at this point, we're about 16 minutes in, you may be thinking that all roads in activating your vision lead back to Apollo 13, and you could be a little bit right there. Because one of the other things that they did to activate their vision in Apollo 13 is that they began by appreciating what's best. So here they were trying to figure out, with the astronauts 200,000 miles out in space, they were trying to figure out, how do we bring them home safely using only what they have on board? So rather than beginning with what to do, one of the first things they did is to say, what's good on the ship? Collect everything that they have on board. And so that's what they went about doing. They went about actually gathering up all of the resources that they had, all of the material resources on board the ship, as well as gathering people with all of the pertinent expertise, design and manufacturing expertise, and then all that was still working or still functional in some way on the craft. And they used that inventory of all they had on board as a way to craft their solution. Now, this sounds terrific as we talk about it now in theory, but what I've discovered is that most of us are much more practiced at focusing on what we aren't, what we don't have, what's gone wrong, or where we failed, as opposed to cataloging what we do have, what we want, where we have succeeded. And yet activating our vision requires appreciating the abilities that we have and unleashing the energy within us to put those abilities to work to achieve that vision. So with that in mind, here is an appreciative reflection. This is an exercise that you can do. I recommend you do it sometime in follow-up to this session. This is an appreciative reflection that allows you to get started on activating your vision by inventorying everything you have on board. So take a moment right now, as we're together, wherever in the country, wherever in the world we might be. Take a moment right now. Take a deep breath. And as you take that deep breath, I'd like to invite you to recall a high point in your career, in your community service, in your educational life, in your life overall. Just take a moment right now to recall a high point, a time when you felt most engaged, effective, maybe grateful or proud. And get that example, get that time in mind. Now, you may even, as you look back on it now, discover that you were dealing with something that was somehow challenging. But as you look back, this example, it stands out as a high point. So get in mind to yourself, what makes it stand out? Now, without being humble, so suspend the humility there. Take a moment to go deeper. What do you value about yourself in this situation? What do you value about what you did or how you did it? Now take your reflection deeper. What do you think others who might have been involved would say they valued about what you did or how you did it? As you get that inventory in mind, think about this situation and the others like it in your life. What is it that you're aware is happening when you are at your best? What are those abiding values, strengths, abilities, best practices? What are all the things that are evident when you are at your best? Well, we've done that exercise briefly here. What I recommend is that everyone take some time to do this reflection sometime soon and at regular intervals throughout your career. And I don't mean like 5-year intervals, but at least this is something that we're doing annually. And particularly, this is something that we do before we embark on attacking or pursuing something big or important to us. Because what this reflection does is it reminds us of our abilities. It unleashes the energy of possibility. And it puts in front of us everything that we have going for us, from which we can create our vision, from which we can create our ideal. And one more reason to do this appreciative reflection, there have been some great studies recently on the value of reflection, in particular, the impact on productivity. It turns out that intentional reflection increases productivity by about 30%. And who doesn't want to be 30% more productive? So what we're doing here when we're appreciating what's best is that we're creating this inventory of all that we have on board. And the reason is that from that, we are able to move to envisioning the ideal, knowing that we actually have the seeds of that ideal within us right now. That gives our vision a sense of possibility. It unleashes innovation, and it also opens us up to risk-taking and experimentation. This leads us now into our second element of activating your vision, which is imagining your ideal. And there are a lot of wonderful guides out there on creating inspiring visions. There are vision quest guides that include guided retreats, certainly creating vision boards. There are some terrific online tools. Something that I'd like to focus on is what I've discovered are essential elements for an inspiring and instructive vision. For many of us, when we think about a vision for ourselves or our organization, we think about the results. We think about kind of what we want to have or achieve or accomplish. And what I've discovered is that for a vision to truly be meaningful in our lives, for a vision to be complete, as David Brooks talked about in his book, The Road to Character, that, there are really two kinds of virtues. There are resume virtues, the things we accomplish and accumulate, and there are eulogy virtues, the way that we moved through life and impacted others, lived in alignment with our values. When our vision can incorporate or encompass both the resume virtues and the eulogy virtues, then it becomes a complete vision. So what we want to start with is the being aspect of the vision. What's the quality of our internal experience when we see ourselves at our ideal? How are we actually experiencing life? How are we healthy and honoring and tending our wholeness? The next key element is the vision for what we are doing. If we imagine ourselves looking at our ideal lives, individually again or organizationally, if we're looking into a crystal ball, seeing the ideal, what is it that we see happening? How are we as an organization acting? How are we acting aligned with our values, aligned with what we aspire to, what we want to achieve, and what we know or believe to be our potential? When we multiply the being by the doing, that results, if you will, in having. And those are important elements of our vision as well. What do we see happening as a result of the choices we've made and the internal experience that we've cultivated? This is how we envision the ideal, and then we take that future, what we might call there, and we bring it to here. We do that by placing ourselves into that future first and then backing up to the present. So here's a question that I love to ask. As you see on the screen, it's asked as if we imagine we're in January 2020, looking back at this year as having turned out to be your finest hour. What is it you'd be most grateful, excited, or joyful to have realized in your life, in your work, in your organization? But this question can be reframed to create a vision for really anything that we face. So imagine that we're on the other side of this software implementation, and we're looking back at it as having turned out to be our finest hour. What would we be most excited about, grateful for, proud of? We can do the same thing when we're facing some sort of adversity or challenge, is to ask ourselves, if I was on the other side of this adversity and I'm on that other side looking back, really grateful for the choices I made, for where I arrived, what is it that I would be most grateful for? What that helps me to do is then to bring that there to here, starting in the present and asking the question, so if that's my ideal, what simple things could I do right now? And we always want to start there with just, what are the simple things I could do? Then we take it deeper. If I was 10 times bolder, what would I try? Now notice the question C here. This asks, how do I capitalize on what I already have on board? So this connects you back to appreciating what's best by asking, how can I leverage the things I already possess? Question D takes that deeper to say, how can I also capitalize on the people who I trust the most? And then finally, we're moving that into, what action will I take right now? That's essential because I need to start acting in alignment in my with my vision. So what is it, now that I've imagined my ideal, what is it that I can do to act in alignment? I think this is an important place for us to pause, to know that there is a brain basis, a neurochemical basis for the practices that we're talking about. Asking unconditionally positive questions, envisioning the ideal on the other side of challenges. The reason that we engage questions like this, that we create affirmative images, recognizing the challenges that we face and relating to them in a constructive way. This is based in conversational intelligence, which really is, it's research by the author Judith E. Glaser, who has really brought together the best in neuroscience research to allow us to work effectively in the moment with the various networks of the brain. And part of what this research has revealed is that when we ask unconditionally positive questions, when we ask discovery-oriented questions, again, into even challenging circumstances, that keeps us connected with the executive function of the brain, the area of the brain where our innovation, our creativity, our ability to celebrate with others, to stay resilient and cooperate with others, to develop high trust in ourselves and others. That's really in that prefrontal cortex or executive function of the brain. It turns out that when we ask threatening or fear-based or deficit questions, questions about what's wrong with me? Why can't I figure this out? Why can't we figure this out? I worked with someone years ago who said, if we don't figure out the solution to this, that will be the end of our company. It could be very well the end of our company. And of course, that inspired a lot of creativity and so on. Okay, a little moment of sarcasm there. Of course, it didn't inspire any creativity in anyone. What it did is it put everyone into self-protection mode. It put everyone into the fear mode that cuts us off from those higher states of thinking, and doesn't give us access to our creativity and our ability to innovate. In the case of Apollo 13, if you're familiar with the story, you'll know that they innovated a solution out of tube socks and duct tape were a couple of the things they used. And one of the reasons that people were involved attribute that innovative ability to is the fact that even though they were working against the clock in an incredibly difficult situation, that they stayed connected to this affirmative vision that they would keep the astronauts alive in space long enough to figure out how to bring them home. And every time that something that they tried didn't work out, instead of saying, whose fault was it, what went wrong, or catastrophizing, oh no, we'll never figure it out. Instead of going there, what they did is they stayed in an appreciative place. And they said, okay, that didn't work. What can we learn from it? How is that useful to us? So there is a brain basis for our engaging this affirmative statement of our ideal, and then reminding ourselves or reflecting on all that we have on board as we look to innovate and create strategies to bring our vision to pass. I highly recommend. I had the opportunity to study with Judith to study for the certification in conversational intelligence with Judith, and I highly recommend her book, Conversational Intelligence. It has some fantastic case studies on how engaging this practice of conversational intelligence really does allow us to design pathways that will move us in the direction of what we want, built on the infinite capacity that we have within our brains and within the brains of the people who we live and work with. So this is a good moment to pause and also acknowledge some other important research around hope and aspiration. There a few years ago, I found circulating in a number of businesses this saying that hope is not a strategy. And what's interesting about that and incorrect about that is that it turns out, and this is particularly based on Charles Snyder's research, that you can't formulate strategy without hope. So hope is essential to actually being able to create and then activate a strategy. So what you see here from Snyder's research are the elements of hope. Hope being a brain-based network that allows us to stay connected with our capacity and resilience, the ability to keep trying and to keep going, as opposed to abandoning our vision because we're facing a challenge that we don't quite yet have the answer to. So hope has in it the element of goals, whatever that thing is that we want to achieve, how we're going to achieve it, which we call pathways or roadmaps. And notice that's plural because we often, in charting the course to our vision, will get focused on there's only one way to get there, when in reality there are multiple ways to get there. So we want to allow ourselves asking the question, so what other ways are possible to get to that ideal? And then finally is agency. And that is the internal empowerment, the empowering belief that I can choose to act on my own behalf, to carry out my pathway, leading me toward my ideal. So this brings us to, how is it that we truly act in alignment? The third piece of activating our vision. And that's remembering that consistently we have the power to choose. This is going back to the Frankl quote about really creating and honoring the space between stimulus and response. That whatever condition we face, we can make choices to create for ourselves in the moment the experience we want, even in the face of great challenges. So acting in alignment, it really relies upon recognizing that we, individually and in our organizations, we are not our circumstances. We are not defined by the things that happen to us or around us. Rather, that we can choose to relate to our circumstances in a healthful way, in a way that allows us to choose and engage the best of ourselves and continue moving in the direction of what we want most. Now, sometimes that means reimagining our ideal. And that's where the elements of the ideal need to include the being and the doing, not just the having. Because if there's only a particular outcome that makes up our vision, I have to achieve X by such a date, or my vision, the vision for our company looks like this particular outcome only, without speaking to how are we acting, what are our values, and what are we doing. What can happen is that if something comes along that requires us to make a shift or a change, we don't have the ability to do so. And so we end up abandoning the vision or the sense of vision altogether. So acting in alignment. When we are carrying out our vision and perhaps have a circumstance occur that is unexpected or seems like a barrier on the pathway, there are three things that we can do. The first is to practice pause. And by practicing pause, what I mean is at the individual level, being aware of when we are noticing something arising that is stressful, frustrating, or even angering. Being aware of that reaction, breathing deeply, and connecting with what matters most to us. So practicing pause begins at the individual level, particularly for us as leaders, because the leader's whisper is a shout. And so as a leader, if we are pursuing our vision and something happens that hasn't worked out, that is somehow distressing or greatly challenging or potentially derailing to us, as a leader, I need to be able to be present and respond effectively with my own personal reaction, my own personal emotions around the challenge. So if you're familiar with emotional intelligence, you'll recognize this as self-awareness and self-regulation, the ability to see when we've become triggered, to use the breath as a way to interrupt the stress response so that we can then connect with, choose a healthful, positive, or life-giving response, as opposed to operating out of fear or self-protection. Practicing pause, there's a great book for organizational leaders around this by Kevin Cashman. It's called The Pause Principle. And what I love about the pause principle is that it also talks about how we pause at the organizational level, particularly when our circumstances are chaotic or complex. We've talked throughout the session so far about how important it is to choose curiosity as we are developing our vision, and as we are carrying out our vision, to choose curiosity about what's happening, what we have on board, to choose curiosity about what it would look like if we were successful on the other side. And what this does is it allows us to adapt without abandoning our vision. It allows us to say, okay, so if this is what we thought would happen, reality is unfolding in a different way. What can we do to adapt or to innovate? The quote that you see here is also from Apollo 13, and this was as they were pursuing their vision, and they thought they had a fix, they thought they had a strategy, and they asked a question about the lunar module, if it was able to do something, and someone responded, "Well, don't tell, that's not what it was designed for." And the mission commander responded again, "Don't tell me what it's designed to do. Tell me what it can do." We need to think about ourselves, our organizations, everyone within our organization in that way. Not just what are we necessarily doing, what does our job description say that we do, but what is it that we're fully capable of? What are the possibilities that maybe we haven't even imagined? Or as the old story, Mary Kay Ash used to like to tell the story of the bumblebee, that supposedly aerodynamically the bumblebee shouldn't be able to fly, but the bumblebee doesn't know it, so it keeps on flying. So sometimes we have grand visions that there are those who may say it's not possible. And yet, if we stay connected with that, the full capacity of the executive function of the brain, if we use techniques like appreciating and discovery, celebrating and sharing, when we do that together, we co-create a vision that allows us to innovate, allows us to take risks, allows us to figure out how to create an oxygen filter out of tube socks and duct tape, as they did in Apollo 13. Or maybe, as in the story that Mary Kay Ash liked to tell, that maybe even though we think that maybe we can't fly, maybe we can. Maybe we actually can discover extraordinary things, and through our vision, transform the world around us by bringing curiosity to what's possible for our future, bringing curiosity to whatever challenges we face, and asking, what is the compelling vision that is on the other side? So as we move into closing, we've talked a lot about the relationship between constructive questions, discovery questions, and visioning, because those questions really allow us to appreciate what's best. They allow us to create an inspiring and instructive vision. And then they also allow us to ask, what choices can I make? What action can I take that's in alignment with my vision? I like to pause here and mention that along the way, we will, of course, experience frustration, disappointment, and challenges. And sometimes they can become showstoppers in terms of staying inspired. What I like to do is to encourage us to stay curious longer and to ask, what might this frustration tell me I care about? What values are activated in me as I experience this particular challenge? That allows me to continue moving forward, putting something that's very popular, particularly in athletics, to work, which is called motivational imagery. So if a particular obstacle happens, what is it then that I can do? What is it that I believe that I might be capable of? And this all happens when, again, we come from a place of curiosity about what's possible. And then we act in line with what we envision, not waiting till we feel confident or sure, but rather knowing, as Russ Harris wrote about in his great book, Acceptance and Commitment Training, rather knowing that the actions of confidence, the actions of vision, come before the feelings. So we have to act in alignment, and that allows us to create the confidence to continue pursuing our vision. So what I'm hopeful for is there might be something in our time together today that has been useful, something that you might be interested in perhaps getting good at as it relates to activating your vision. And perhaps you'll be inspired to then begin practicing that so you can move in the direction of what matters most, so that you can put these 3 practices to work, allowing you to be so clear about what you're saying yes to in your life that you also have the capacity to say no to those things that are not in support of what you hope for most. I hope, again, there's been something valuable for everyone in our session today. Sarah, I'd like to open it up for questions.
Wonderful. Yes, this is the time to submit any and all questions. So if you have something that you are wondering about throughout this presentation, if you will submit those to the question box.
And Sarah, I think while we're waiting for questions, we'll also be providing my email address to anyone who might be interested in any specific follow-up.
That is correct. So after this presentation, this will be recorded and downloaded, and either later this afternoon or tomorrow, this recording as well as a survey will be emailed out to those who joined us with along your information. So if you have any further questions, you can reach out to our wonderful host.
Okay.
We'll give it a couple more minutes to send any questions.
Okay. Sarah, do you have any questions?
I think you did a wonderful job, and I'm beginning to believe that our guest also thinks so, since we do not have any questions. I think you were just that thorough. So thank you so much, Deb, for coming on this afternoon and sharing this wonderful expertise. I know I learned a lot, and it was good to take those several breaths and just reflect and recognize a lot that's going on in my own life. So thank you for sharing your wise words, and thank you to the attendees for participating this afternoon. I just want to encourage you again to check out the career resources and events, both electronic and in person, provided to you by the Vanderbilt Alumni Association. And I will send that follow-up email and archive link as soon as possible. We are always looking to improve upon our offerings to alumni, so please be in touch and let us know how we can best support you. Thanks again for joining us, and have a wonderful day.
All right. Thanks, Sarah.